So please give me time and bear with me, because I think that your committee is very important. I thank you for inviting me to give my views to this important national dialogue. It is my prayer that you fully discharge your mandate, for the well-being of our beloved country of ours depends on the issues you have identified for negotiations being successfully resolved. Let me start with the easiest: establishment and entrenchment of the state offices. I support. And in fact, way back in April 1992, I published a constitutional amendment to have that office plus 2 deputy governors. And as you know, during the national negotiations, which happened in 2007-8, again, we established that office. And as you also know, during the BPI process, mark you, the BPI was only challenged on procedure, how it was appointed. But the content of BPI are still there, and you can make reference to them. And the BPI, we did draft a constitutional amendment, and if you look at Article 107A, there we have provided for leader of opposition. And if you look at Part 2A, there we have provided for the post of Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, which of course now is Prime Cabinet Secretary. Outstanding issues. Article 43 of the Constitution. Article 43 of the Constitution gives us economic and social rights. That particular article is similar to, and in fact I know I drafted it during the committee stage where I was a member. We borrowed from the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Therefore, the first thing which is important on that is to recognize that the primary responsibility to realize these rights lies on the government. A democratically elected government would have been voted into office on the basis of the manifesto and the pronouncement of its leaders on the policies and programs they would put in place to realize these rights once elected. The second point to take into account is that it is accepted that these rights are not immediately achievable due to the many reasons, including insufficient resources. Therefore, the responsibility on the shoulders of the government is to achieve these rights progressively. And there, the word progressively has been used both in our Constitution, Article 21(2) of the Constitution, if you read it, and also in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, to which Kenya is a party. So, it is there. The number one issue, as you know, in Kenya today is the unprecedented high cost of living, which is causing unbearable suffering, misery, anxiety, and hunger among the populace in Kenya. As a prominent church leader has stated, we are strangling the lives of the poor Kenyans. History is replete with examples where people in countries facing a national crisis come together to fight the threat. Mwalimu Julius Nyerere used to say that just as in UK, for example, everybody came together to face the threat to the nation caused by Germany, which led to the Second World War. So we in Africa are in a state of war, and it is a war against ignorance, poverty, and disease. And this war can only be won if we all come together. In this national crisis, it calls on the government and all the people to humble themselves and collectively and in a sober manner address the issue. I am therefore suggesting to this National Dialogue Committee that a national consultation on the national economic crisis be convened to come up with recommendations not only to ameliorate the high cost living costs, but also make people better understand the bitter medicine and hard decisions that must be taken to put the economy on the right track. Such a national consultation should include political leaders, religious leaders, professionals, economists, business and farming communities, opinion makers, etc. The national consultation should be convened immediately a report is approved by Parliament. Let me take this opportunity also to make reference to Article 204, since it touches on Article 43. And Article 204 provides for equalization of equalization funds, but it is targeted at groups which were discriminated against during the colonial time. And although marginalized areas is not defined in the Constitution, marginalized community is defined, and it makes reference to traditional community or indigenous community, etc. Since independence, we now have recent areas where one can say they are marginalized. And here I'm referring to, for example, slums in the urban areas have really spread. And now these slums are spreading into the rural areas where the living conditions are deplorable. I therefore recommend that a poverty alleviation fund be created to address the economic and social needs of the vulnerable groups in such areas. This will be implementing Article 43 as read with Article 21(3) of the Constitution, which makes specific reference to special measures being taken to assist the vulnerable people. And we don't have a specific fund for that. Of course, one can argue that every government program is addressing that issue. But we have indigent Kenyans who are really suffering, and such a fund can focus itself on such people. Implementation of the 2/3 gender rule. There have been failed attempts to achieve the 2/3 gender rule. I do recall that in many of the drafts of the proposed constitution, a clause similar to Article 1772 of the Constitution, which applies to gender top-up in county assemblies after elections, depending on the number of persons elected, was provided for to apply to the National Assembly and the Senate. Somehow, although it was a draft in the process of discussions and so on, somehow that clause was removed. And that clause only remained in reference to county assembly. I just recommend that an article similar to Article 1772 be reintroduced to apply to the National Assembly and the Senate. This should be accompanied by a carrot and stick approach, particularly in policies and programs and legislation aimed at political parties, to encourage them to nominate women to elective seats in their strongholds. This will aim at having more women elected parliamentarians so that the top-up figure will be reduced and in the long run, hopefully eliminated. Electoral justice and related matters, restructuring and reconstitution of IEBC. This is a complex issue which demands that we think out of the box. This country has had basically 3 ways of appointing commissioners. The first is the government-controlled commission. Up to May 1992, the Electoral Commission was basically under the government. The Electoral Commission had, in fact, by a legal notice, delegated its constitutional function of conducting or supervising elections to the Attorney General, who had an officer in his office called the Supervisor of Elections, who in turn appointed district commissioners as returning officers. And when I became Attorney General, I was basically also now the chairman of the Electoral Commission. I was in charge of the elections in this Republic of Kenya. But I can tell you that I revoked that legal notice and restored the function of conducting elections to its rightful place, although the president continued to appoint the commissioners. Just before I revoked the legal notice, I was surprised when I was invaded in my office by all the opposition political parties and the leaders at around 6:37 p.m. as I was working. And I believe they came because I was the Attorney General, but also because I was the person in charge of elections. They came with their key supporters. I don't know whether I can, some of the, no, some, I think most of you are young to have among the key supporters at that time. I can't think. I think a lot of shock, I think the only one who may qualify is.
I don't think I was there. This is a timely and godly hour.
After the Mario was serious, I was treated in Moi University, I think, at that time, or maybe in some primary school in Mombasa. This was now in May of 1992. All the opposition political parties plus their key supporters came to my office and made it clear to me that I convey to the president that he disbands the Electoral Commission immediately and new members appointed with their involvement. In other words, they wanted to propose members and the president appoints. Of course, the clarion call at that time was no new Electoral Commission, no elections. To cut the long story short, and that would one day appear in my memoirs in an extenso, we discussed up to about 10 p.m. and they agreed with my proposal, which was in accordance with the Constitution as it was then. The proposal was that although the president had no constitutional powers to disband the commission once appointed, however, the Constitution at that time provided only a minimum of members of the Electoral Commission. So consequently, he could appoint additional members. So I say the way I can help them is through that way, or advise the government. So we agreed that they should go and nominate, give me a list of persons from whom the president can, in his absolute discretion, appoint. I informed them that such persons should not be officials of the political party or any party, or be active members of their party or any party, or be persons known to belong to their party or any party. Furthermore, such persons should be persons of integrity well respected in society, persons who had retired honorably from public or private sectors, or well-known senior professionals, or persons known for their independence of mind. In short, they should be persons of gravitas. As Nigerians would say, persons of legal luminaries. In view of the constitutional discretion vested in the president, I asked each leader not to give me a list where they have all sat down and agreed, but each leader had to submit a list to me separately. I can tell you, within 2 days, I received from each letter suggesting, in fact, there was no list which had suggested names of under 12. Some had 16, 14, 15, whatever. And the letters, I can tell you, must be there in the Attorney General's office, were actually signed by the leaders, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, Honorable Mwai Kibaki, Kijana Wamalwa, Martin Shikuku, and so on and so on. At that time, we were dealing with about 9 opposition political parties, but these were the major ones. And the leaders applied their mind to it and produced those lists. That point is going to be important on how a political party can nominate. It should really be at a very high level, under the signature of the president, party leader, and so on. Now, I examined all those letters. I can tell you that 3 or 4 names appeared in nearly all the lists. 3 or 4 names. My memory is going short, but I know Margaret Kenyatta was one of them who appeared in almost all the lists. There was Harry Mule, a former PS Treasury, again, whose name appeared in nearly all the lists, and there were others. I can tell you the president, when I showed him and analyzed the situation, had no problem whatsoever in appointing the names which were common in all the lists. And that's how the additional names to the Electoral Commission were appointed, in addition to those already appointed by the president earlier. After the IPPG of 1997, it was agreed that KANU nominates for appointment 11, and the opposition parties nominate for appointment 10, and they did so. And the Electoral Commission was the largest I ever known, had 21 members. You know, elected or appointed by the president on the nomination of political parties, direct nominations, political parties. And like before, in my situation where I said, give me a number of names and we shall decide from there. They were just appointing a name and that is it. Of course, you'll agree with me that 21 members are a bit unwieldy. But let me remind you that this is the Electoral Commission which delivered the 2002 general elections, whose results were uploaded and accepted locally here in Kenya, regionally and internationally. And I believe it was the only general election in the multi-party era, and that is after we amended the Constitution, where no election petition was filed challenging the election of the president. So what I'm trying to say, when you're considering these issues in a sober manner, don't try to demonize party should not nominate. I think that should be on the table, because our user has shown it as I've seen it. The chairman, yeah. So, I mentioned about the first government control electoral commission, the second commissions nominated by political parties. And now the third is what we have been experiencing since 2007. The third is the so-called commissions which are expert-based, where the election board, through advertising, interviewing, and selecting the members on merit. This has been Kenya's experience under the new constitution. This looks good on paper and has many points in its favor. However, the electoral commissions so appointed have not inspired confidence up to now. But its major merit is that the members, as opposed to the experts, they are non-partisan and not affiliated to a political party. However, we have noticed that the selection board, they rarely agree, even on method of scoring points, and that method can also be interfered with when ensuring that a member gives very high points to the one he favors and very low to the one he doesn't like, so that when it comes to average, somebody goes through. And in fact, I believe you have heard here allegations that even on the last electoral commission, some of the commissioners, although it was through that system, that some of the commissioners were appointed as a result of maneuverings by certain political powers or political or eminent politicians. So it can also be manipulated, in other words. To cut a long story short, what is my proposal? My proposal and recommendations, having studied the three matters of appointing commissioners, is that we have a mixed system of some commissioners nominated by political parties and some commissioners appointed through a refined system that we now have. In this way, the benefits from both ways can be realized. I suggest, and what I'm suggesting here can be refined in further discussions, particularly amongst you and amongst the political parties and other key stakeholders. I suggest that the top 2 or 3 political parties should nominate people for appointment, direct appointment to the Electoral Commission. And they should, the top 2 or 3 should nominate 1 commissioner each. And the rest of the political parties should jointly nominate 1. The persons to be nominated, that's a procedure, by the political parties should meet the set criteria, which I've already mentioned, is the criteria that I used and which the political party leaders accepted and which they implemented because they gave me real proper names. People of integrity, well-known reputation and whatnot. They gave me those names, and out of which we appointed that criteria can be used by the political parties in suggesting the names. This can, of course, be refined properly. This will enable the Commission to have persons of gravitas and also experts. The persons of gravitas, you see, people who, if you appoint, they can just say, yeah, that one we agree, you know. Such a person, I can tell you, is not likely to apply and be subjected for shortlisting and for appearing before a panel a panel of youngsters and whatnot and so on. He will not. But such a person can only be appointed by elder statesmen who are the party leaders or leaders of the coalition of parties, just directly, without any problem. So this system will enable such persons to be appointed rather than this other system that we are having. And so once the political parties are appointed, then the balance of the commission can be appointed through the system that we have with proper amendments to take care of the weaknesses that we have seen them have. So that's what I would suggest on the issue of reconstituting the commission. And probably the political parties liaison committee constituted under Article 38 of the Political Parties Act could play a role, and therefore the Act should be amended for it to play that role. The other suggestions I would suggest under this is that we are taking into account the decisions of the Supreme Court in the various election petitions and so on how the EC operates and functions. Some amendments ought to be made to the various laws to make clear that the chairman of the Electoral Commission does not act on his own, but he acts on the decision of the Commission, on a decision that collectively arrived at. And that before even they announce the presidential elections, they must then have looked at Form 34C, which shows the results of the presidential elections, and not just a summary of what the result of each county. That's not a verification, that's not tallying. But that law needs to be tightened so that we are on proper footing. The other point under the, you had me to address you on was audit of the 2022 presidential election. The Supreme Court has exclusive jurisdiction to hear and determine disputes relating to the elections to the office of the President. And his decision is final, Article 142. To my mind, the audit cannot change or reverse the decision of the Supreme Court through a constitutional and legal process. The audit is like a post-mortem, which cannot revive a dead body, but can tell you the cause of the death. And that's what we want to know in this audit. We want to know and identify the shortcomings, the weaknesses, the loopholes, or the shortfalls which should be rectified before the next election. In fact, this is the only way you can improve on the electoral processes and instill confidence of the people in it. In my mind, in fact, such audits that we are asking for, it should be held after every general election, proper audit, so that we can progressively improve our electoral systems. Many election observers have observed that normally the election process up to the polling day was credible and counting in the polling stations was technically professional. The problem lies in tallying, tabulation, and declaration of results. The issue of whether or not the server should be opened has engaged the public debate for some time now. The more debate on this matter goes on, the more suspicions are created or raised that where there is no smoke, there must be some fire. this has left a doubt or a lingering thought in the minds of people that it may not be that the figures in the portal are different from the figures in the server. That it may not be, but it could be so. And this may repeat itself in the next election. If the same is not cleared, if these doubts are not cleared, it could erode confidence in future elections and reduce the figure of people participating in such elections. I am therefore recommending and proposing that a law should be enacted to make servers automatically open and accessible to anyone, that as soon as the presidential elections are declared. In other words, as soon as the presidential elections are declared, and that's normally the last to be declared, the server should be open, and it should be open and accessible to whoever wants to access it. Rather than these arguments we have been having in 2013, 2017, with the court, go and open the observer. Oh, we cannot open because of some foreign company has some rights, I don't know, intellectual rights over it. We can't just interfere. I think it should be very clear to whoever comes to assist us that the servers will be open. And we can only do that if we make it law that the server will be open as soon as the results are declared, and will be accessible to every person. And even those who want to file petitions now, they can use it, the information there to file their petitions. Last, permit me, I'm a Pan-Africanist, and I've been a Pan-Africanist since I was in intermediate school, before I went to Alliance High School in the area of Mheshimiwa. But I've taken notice of the fact that the leaders of the two coalitions which constitute this committee are believers, are also Pan-Africanists and believers in the greater political, economic, social integration of East Africa, and indeed Africa region as a whole, as a stepping stone for faster economic development for the benefit of our people. But what I'm going to say again is relevant to Article 43, is relevant to the rising costs, is relevant to stabilizing our economy and making sure that it can take off, can grow at an accelerated pace. In BBI, we recommended an amendment to the Constitution, and we had a new Article 10A, which reads as follows. 10A, regional integration and cohesion. This constitution embraces the goals of African unity and political confederation of the Eastern Africa region as integral towards attainment of sustainable development, prosperity for all, and stability. So I'm recommending to you that you also recommend such a clause in terms of the economic and social rights, that we also have that clause in our constitution. That was my little thing. Now, just for the verbal thing, number one, I looked at your terms of reference, and I wasn't sure whether you can recommend additional or reduction of counties. I was not very, very sure on that. And therefore I did not write my thoughts down. But since it appeared before you, just on the off the cuff, I can tell you that that's a very, very sensitive matter. I can say in a sense I was sort of responsible for the 47 counties, because if you followed the arguments at that time, some were suggesting over 100, some were suggesting about 14, some were suggesting 18, and there was no way forward. But when I suggested that we just follow the districts which had been recognized in law, in the Independent and Boundaries on the Provincial and District Boundaries Act, which I piloted through Parliament in 1992, that we just accept that as a model, and so the 47 counties, everybody agreed, and we have 47 counties. Now, to take the very grave step to add, or take a very grave step to deduct, I suggest it's not a matter that can be lightly handled through a committee which has limited time and which has more pressing, important issues to decide. And therefore, I suggest that if you think that there's some merit in either adding and either reducing, maybe you recommend that the matter be separately handled properly by another body or whatever, people to look into the matter more carefully. That's the matter. Two, I also had some suggestions, but I think here you are within your mandate. I have been a senator, and I'm glad the leader of majority is here. He worked very well, and he has really matured over a very short time. He keeps a very young man and he has matured so quickly.